Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Lisa.
So I'm Lisa Mazzanetto. I'm a mental health therapist, addiction specialist in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I am Kathy Godfrey, no longer in Asheville, North Carolina, but now
Mer.
currently in Hickory, North Carolina. And I too have worked in the field of recovery for, I guess we're working on 8 years now this time. Also, I've had a couple of stints earlier. We could say off and on for the last 20 years. My degree is actually in writing, though, which I also use a lot for transformation purposes for folks in recovery and otherwise. So yeah, here we are doing this. I don't remember what episode this is. Is it 04? 5?
Yes.
04?
04. Thank you for that. I usually
Yeah.
take notes and I haven't taken my notes out today. So, yes, episode 04 of Making Change.
Mhm.
And I'm excited. I was giggling about your text last night when you texted me about what we were going to talk about today. And I got so excited about talking about abandonment and unworthiness.
Oh yeah, only our people could be excited about that, right?
Right?
Like, woohoo, abandonment, yes.
Yes.
Well, the reason I want to invite folks to do the same, so I'll tell everybody why we're talking about that particular topic today, because one of our listeners and someone that we both know requested that we discuss this topic and just explore it and see maybe what new things we can see and what kind of helpful practices might come out of our conversation. And I immediately was excited about it because everybody that I've ever worked with in this field, and you know how, like you, hundreds of people by now, um,
Mm-hmm.
have all expressed some sort of struggle or challenge with feeling like they deserve the life that they want and being just kind of mystified by what often is called self-sabotage, which could just be as simple as really wanting a certain kind of life, a certain way of feeling and being in the world, and seemingly unable to make that happen for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how that's so rooted in those beliefs, those core beliefs about themselves of not being good enough, not being lovable, not being worthy. I see it all the time.
You want to talk a little bit about how that shows up in your practice?
Oh my gosh, we could talk a whole hour just about that, but I will try my best to synthesize that. And, I see it so often. So much of the work I do with clients is through an attachment lens, and attachment work really just from a basic perspective is about unmet needs and how people integrate those unmet needs into their self-concept and self-beliefs. And that's just a really simplified way of looking at um, things through an attachment lens. But women come in to therapy and really struggle with those negative core beliefs that were really rooted in unmet needs, and then find all this evidence to support that in their day to day as they navigate life. And they integrate it as, not being good enough, not feeling lovable, not feeling worthy of. I mean, there's a whole long list of how those beliefs show up, and it's really coming from that fear of abandonment and rejection, and we work on that. And yet I see so many women just default back to that
Mhm.
place of, constantly finding evidence. And just before we started recording, we were talking about, and maybe you could just share that great example of like when somebody doesn't smile at you.
Right, that's a simple example that I used to use for when I was doing groups of clients. It was often difficult for them when they were new to identify that they had some sort of self-definition of unworthiness. And I remember myself, like I was so ashamed of being me that I couldn't even admit that I felt unworthy. Like that just seemed like more proof that I was right about me, that I had something to be ashamed of. So I would often see clients new in recovery, especially, unable to identify that. Like they would feel like, well, no, I've always felt pretty good about myself, and I can be kind of bitchy, so I just can kind of take over a situation. And they saw that as an expression of worthiness, but actually it isn't. And so I would use that simple example of, well, let's just look at your behavior and see what that tells us about your self-definition. And I would say, if you smile at someone and they don't smile back, what is your normal reaction? And almost always there's a kind of leaning back and a sort of an immediate posture of being offended. And so then I would be able to say, if you're offended by someone not smiling at you and you have no idea what that really means, then understand that you have just interpreted their lack of a smile as proof that they see you as unworthy, that they are not being respectful of you or not seeing you or acknowledging you.
And then often the response to that experience of not having the smile return is an angry response, an F you response, what's wrong with her? Why does she have such an attitude? And that's that defensive posture that comes from trying to protect that, belief, which they can't even sink into.
Absolutely. That notion of, well, I don't think I have a problem with worthiness. I mean, I can kind of be an asshole sometimes. I can kind of be aggressive, but I also say, because it's funny, I say it this way, that all assholery comes from fear. Like you're never like just feeling good and solid in your value and so confident that you're worthy that you don't even think about it. Like if you are in that place, if you're seeing yourself as that, then the assholery is not a thing. Because there's no reason for it. It's a really interesting thing that we're so mystified by the stuff that we've hidden from ourselves that we think our behavior is mysterious, but it could not be more predictable. If you understand that it's always coming out of the way we see ourselves, then you could look like, quite the talented fortune teller. If you just know that, you can tell everybody everything about how they're going to behave in every kind of situation, because it's the same for everybody. And that aggression always I used to say, a Halloween costume, for unworthiness.
I love that. Yeah. I'm going to be unworthy for Halloween this year. Right. I'll have to come up with a good costume for that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think that just thinking about that unworthiness and how people, well, okay, let me shift for just a second to reflect what you were saying about people not even having that awareness of it. So I've sat with clients before and reflected when they've brought up situations such as the one you just described, not feeling like, having a smile returned or being rejected in a situation or feeling rejected in a situation, feeling disrespected. And then when I reflect that low self-esteem or that shame-based place, I've had people look at me and, with like as though I have three heads of
right.
How could that possibly be true? And I've had people get upset with me or, or they retort to the shame, but can't get through the shame to recognize that it is rooted in those core beliefs of how they see themselves and how they make meaning out of those experiences.
Right. That's the problem with those early self-definitions, is that they happened at such a young age for most of us that we don't see them. Like, it's not like we feel, here's a self, and then here are these beliefs or definitions that I have about myself. That's not how it manifests. When we learn them, when we learn language, I know I say that every time we record, but it's a true thing, and I just want you to look at it. That's not my opinion. So important that our listeners hear that. Nothing that I say is an opinion that I'm wanting any agreement with. Everything I say is an invitation for everybody to look into their own lives and see if it's true or not. Because if you can't or don't want to do that, either one is fine. But it is the seeing it for yourself that changes your experience. So my words are not going to do anything except make you curious. Like that's the best that I can do. So I just want to review quickly for those of you who have listened to the other podcasts. I know this is about the fourth time that you've heard this, but I want to keep reiterating how simple this is. So when we are born, obviously we don't have language. Our left hemisphere, as far as we know, is not processing thoughts the way that you do right now. They're not with language. And so as you acquire a language for all things, an apple or yourself, as you acquire language, you acquire the meanings of the words you're learning. And that includes everything. There is no word, no concept, no definition that is exempt from that. I mean, just think about it right now. How else would you know every word that you know except that you learned it? There's nowhere else for it to come from. So considering that you learned it, then you have to ask, from whom did I learn these words and definitions, including the definitions of myself? And when I'm working with private clients now, and they have a hard time seeing, like, well, what are my self-definitions that are causing all these problematic feelings and behaviors? And I invite them to just notice who was with you when you were at the age of acquiring language. Now tell me about that person and how they see themselves relative to the world, and you will have solved the mystery of what you think about you. There's nowhere else for that to have come from. Now, what happens is people say, no, I learned some things by experience, but you didn't. You learned how to do some things by experience, but you did not learn how to define yourself by experience. You learned how to define yourself, and then you had some experiences, and you thought they meant that your self-definition was true. But really, you already had that self-definition. And so it was, as I like to say, it was what you were looking for. And so what you're looking for creates your experience. It's not mystical at all. We don't even have to call any of this spiritual work. It's just simply understanding how you create an experience for yourself. And it's all meaning. That's what creates the emotional and cognitive experience as well. It's like you're defining everything in terms of what it means about you. It makes it sound like we're just a big world full of narcissists, and we are in a way, because our self-definition absolutely and utterly controls every other experience that we have. There's no way to interpret anything outside of me without going through my self-definition. I can't just put that aside and then make meaning of my experience without it. How would you do that? Then there would be no self to make that, to have that experience or to experience that meaning. So it's one thing. Your self-definition equals your experience of life in big ways, small ways, all the ways. So that's my little review of how simple all of this works. So when we look at experiences like abandonment, rejection, we can see, assuming that what I just described is true, then we can see how a fear of abandonment or fear of rejection has to come from that very foundational definition that we are not as good as. And it could be not as good as others. It could be not as good as I should be, not as good as I want to be, not as good as God wants me to be, not as good as my mother wants me to be. You can tailor that as specifically as you can, as you're aware of it. But it is basically a foundational definition of not good enough for whatever it is.
And so how would you help somebody reframe, or maybe reframe's not the right word, but challenge that, to change the self-definition when they're being confronted with this experience that's causing them to see themselves as, say, unworthy or unlovable through that self-definition?
Yeah, let me address that generally, and then if you like, you can give me a specific example, and we can try and apply it. I actually, for the first time in several months, just wrote a blog post this morning about these yay, about how
Yay!
to do this. And it's very brief, and it's
Mhm.
just a handful of steps. And it applies to any kind of uncomfortable feeling, not just that horrific feeling of rejection or being left, abandonment, but to all unpleasant feelings. So what I suggest is that first you allow yourself to admit the feeling. So you identify the feeling that you're having. Whatever that is. So you can put your own words to that. Identify the feeling. Two is to ask, like, what am I saying about myself that's resulting in this feeling? And that's how you identify the definition, the meaning that you're giving to, for example, if we say, if we can use the smile example again, if I smile at someone and they don't smile back, and then I feel rejected, we could say, then notice that feeling and don't deny it. That's the first important step, is to admit that I have it, and then to ask, well, what am I saying about me and the lack of that return of a smile that is resulting in this feeling? They don't like me. They don't like the way I look, whatever it is. Notice the feeling of that. And then ask, where did I learn that when someone doesn't smile back at me, it means they don't like me? Where did I get that? Now, you're going to be still for a long time and realize that you have no idea. And
Mhm.
it's true about it, whatever you want to fill that blank in with, it's going to be true that you don't remember, like, actively learning that. It feels like
Mhm.
it's part of who you are,
Mhm.
but you did actually learn it. And then next, you can just try on a different perspective, a different definition, we could say, or interpretation of the moment. If you don't smile back at me, what if you didn't even register that I smiled because you're busy making my coffee? Or you're busy thinking about what you have to do next as we pass each other in the hallway. It could be anything.
Mhm.
And here I like to point out that this is not about a duality. It's not, she didn't smile at me because she didn't like me, or she didn't smile at me because she does like me. And then it feels like that doesn't work. I'm not talking about dualities here. I'm talking about substitute a reasonable meaning for the one that's causing the uncomfortable feeling. And then here's the next step. You just notice how the feeling changes. So if I think you don't smile at me because you're busy, that's a very different feeling than you didn't smile at me because you don't like me.
Right. Right.
And so then once you try on the new idea, oh, she didn't smile at me because she's busy. How does that feel? Neutral. Doesn't mean anything about me.
Right. It takes away the personal
Hmm.
like it no longer feels personal.
Right. Exactly. And so then there's a little space. Now in that
Mhm.
space, you can notice that you had the power in seconds, really, to change the way you felt.
Mhm.
If you don't get giddy about having that kind of power, I don't even know like what would make you giddy, because that little simple example is the way that you are creating your felt experience 24/7, whether you own it or you don't. That is what's happening all the time.
Yes, and that's where I wanna remind listeners that in the past episodes that we've gone through some of these processes, and I've talked about the shift in literally in the felt experience where the softening, in my core, for example, like that's an example of how that can change. That felt experience changes, and it is literally you can feel it in the moment, and it is so exciting
It
to
really is.
experience that.
Yeah, because it tells us, so when you think that the way you feel in life and about yourself is created by the circumstances you're in, or by the
Mhm.
people you're around, or maybe just the people that you think about, if you think any of those things are responsible for your feeling anywhere, anytime, you just put yourself in bondage.
Mm.
Because what that would mean is then you are just at the mercy of everything,
Mhm.
everything, even your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And We really did used to think that emotions worked this way too. Like we could just be going along and everything would be fine, and all of a sudden an outside trigger would happen and these universal emotions would get tapped. But that is not what's happening. There, you only have emotion about what you think is meaningful to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're the one who's defining that meaning. It feels like it's automatic only because you are not owning your self-definition. And I just want to say one more time, it can feel difficult to do only because you learned it before you knew you were learning. And so it
Mm-hmm.
feels like who you are. So part of the very powerful practices of Eastern traditions is that ability to sit still long enough for those two things to come apart. The you,
Mm-hmm.
awareness or consciousness, apart from definitions of you. So when you can recognize that it really, the definitions are something you learned and not part of you, then I mean you are like 75% to the life that you want, because that's all then that you have to focus on is, okay, how do I learn to find myself relative to the world in ways that are creating these very unpleasant experiences for me?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that. That's all I do in private practice now, is exactly what I just said, is to help people do that. So they will meet with me every week to say, here are the situations that occurred this past week, and here's how I felt about it. And then we just look and see which self-definitions are creating that experience. We look at when and where that was learned and any current evidence for it. And then we try on a new one and notice how the feeling changes.
Mm-hmm.
If we like it, we keep it. If not, we look for another one. All day long, we can do that. And clients, once they get the hang of that with me, then really we can skip a bunch of steps, because they're doing most of the steps on their own, and they just show up with questions, specific questions about their behavior or feelings that they experienced during the week.
Mm-hmm.
So it can move really fast for all of us who feel like we've lived a lot of life, and we would very much like to now be living the life that we wanted, that we thought we were here to live. And I don't mean that in terms of material or geographical issues, although those are fine too, but I mean living the life that feels the way we thought life could. I've never met anybody that didn't have, no matter how difficult their lives have been, that didn't have that notion of like, man, this is not what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
I just have this like nagging notion that this is not the way that life was meant to feel for me. I think everybody I've ever worked with has had that. And we can remember it. I remember it certainly as a little girl, and I've had lots of clients who have said that as well, that we knew it early on. We looked around and we saw the suffering of the adults, and we were like, ugh, this is, is this what I'm headed for? Does this have to be it?
Right.
Yeah. So it's, I can't say enough times how utterly simple it is. Once you recognize how your experience is being made, you can have all the power in making a new one.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how that's settling with everyone who's been listening, but I hope that you'll have a breath or two or three and just soften into the possibility of it. I hope that you will invite yourself to not settle in an opinion of it, like, because you may have lots of left hemisphere concepts that feel like they're in conflict with what you're hearing me say. That's fine, and is exactly how it works, actually. But the way that you can get some room to check it out for yourself is to say, oh, that opinion that I'm hearing in my thoughts, I also learned that. And so is it possible that there are some things that are new that I have not yet learned, but that I can learn, that can make all the difference?
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, Kathy, I'm listening to you and thinking about, the learned self-definitions from a young age that we may not know, like when or where we learned them
Mm-hmm.
from. mostly when. Would you call that like a subconscious?
Well, uh, I don't call it subconscious because
Okay.
my view of consciousness is one thing. There are not parts or levels of
Mhm.
consciousness. I think that we came up with that term subconscious to try and explain behavior that we could not otherwise explain,
Mhm.
right? So if we do something like super self-destructive, for example, and then we're immediately appalled and sorry, and the devastation is kind of far and wide, and then and I often hear clients say this too, like recovery clients especially, of like, I don't know why I did that. And it feels mysterious. It feels especially mysterious to, say, substance use disorder clients, because they just continually, or have in the past continually, just like slash and burn through their
Mhm.
lives, and
Mhm.
feeling like they don't want to, and that it happens anyway. And I had that experience also with relationships. Like, I do not want to do this again. And then before I could even get again out of my mouth, I would be doing it again.
Mhm.
And I think that our theory of the subconscious is an effort to explain that. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that seem to not have a cause, but they always have a cause. It
Mhm.
is 100% who you think you are. That's the cause always. You can trace behavior right back to super intense feel if we're talking about destructive behavior, back to super intense feelings that you need relief from. And then even before that, there are all these thoughts defining yourself all day long relative to
Mm.
your world
Mhm.
from a place of lack of value. That's so exhausting, because now you have to work super hard, try to make up for that, try to make sure nobody sees it, try not to do
Oh.
anything too stupid to relieve the pressure of it. And if you do, then you have to scramble and try to cover that up and make sure that nobody can trace that back to how you're really feeling and really seeing yourself.
Mm.
You know, it's a it's a simple it's a simple question to ask to understand any behavior. And that was, how was I feeling about myself when I did that?
How was I feeling about myself when I did that?
That's it. And then from there, if folks are willing, we can help them then identify what they were saying, what they were thinking about themselves that resulted in those feelings. And then ultimately, how do you define yourself relative to the rest of the world? That's the foundation of it all. If I see myself as small and powerless and insignificant, I've just set myself up for a few decades of suffering, which I'm talking about myself personally now. That is exactly what I did. And it was no
Mhm.
one's fault. My parents did not wake up and say, I'm going to teach her to see herself in horrible ways so that she can have a miserable life experience. That's not what happened. It was
Right.
just, I learned to see myself the way they saw themselves. That's all.
Right. It makes me think about the card that you talked about, from your greeting card, that last in our last episode, about what if, and I need to defer to you to say about parents.
Yeah. What if parents are just people who had sex?
Right. And I mean, I think about that. I've been thinking about that a lot. I've been listening to Glennon Doyle's Untamed, and she talks about how, parents, she talks a lot about parenting and how, we really are, and I say we because I'm a parent, and I know you are as well, that we really are just people who had sex. Like, we weren't signing up with some sort of training manual on how to be parents. And so we're going into parenting from our own self definition and passing that on, right,
That's
to
it.
the best of our ability, or maybe to the worst of our ability. I don't know, but the best of our ability.
I mean, we're doing the only thing we can, which is be what we think we are.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
anybody's doing. I know that clients hear a lot and they get very frustrated by the notion of everybody's just doing the best they can. And it's been said so much that it annoys me as well. But the reason that it annoys them is because they're like, how does that help? How does it help me to say that this person who had this impact on my life, or these people that I impacted? It goes,
Mm-hmm.
self-definition always goes both ways. It starts with you
Mm-hmm.
and gets projected onto other people. Like, how does that help me? And it really doesn't, unless you take that extra step of, like we just did, of like seeing with totally clear eyes. Again, I say, this is not an opinion. You can see, if you're willing to look at your parents with clear eyes, that they were just two people that had sex. That's all. If you add anything to that, you are setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're setting them up for rejection
Mm-hmm.
and judgment. And who wants to carry all that around? I mean, isn't it time we just be free?
Well, and as I just kind of had this aha moment of, setting ourselves up for rejection and abandonment from our own worthiness of how we see our parents showing up as our parents.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know what often happens to us is we see our parents' failures as evidence of our unworthiness.
Yes. Oh my
If
gosh. I see that with people all the time.
if I were different slash better in some way, they would have been different parents. That's what most of us think, even if you've never actually sat down and admitted that to yourself. If you have a lot of conflict when you think about your parents, that is what you're doing to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds me of a brilliant client that we had at the treatment center where you and I both worked. It might even have been when we were there together. But I was doing a group about something I don't remember. But the part that I remember was that there was a client in the room who suddenly like just had this outburst, and it wasn't related to what I was talking about. It was something that was just kind of percolating, word I love to use. It was kind of percolating in her that just suddenly, like, it just lit her up. And she went, oh, like in group. And I said, what's happening? I got very excited. What's happening over there? And she said, oh my God, I have just realized that I've struggled my whole life with feeling rejected by my parents, by my family, by my friends, by my lovers, by everyone. And she said, I just realized that what was happening was I am always rejecting myself, always. And so the only rejection I am ever truly experiencing is that I am rejecting myself. She found tremendous freedom from that, and I was really grateful. But there's another step now that I love, is makes that so much clearer. You're never actually rejecting or abandoning yourself. You are rejecting or abandoning the way you've been defining yourself. So if you
Mm.
define yourself as not good enough, you're the first one to bail on you in every
Mm-hmm.
scenario, which is mostly in your own thinking. But in every scenario, you're the first one to bail. So you already are coming into, say, a romantic relationship, an interaction with your mother. And literally, it could be any interaction or exchange, even in your thoughts. And you are bringing a self that you have defined as not good enough. So you are entering every interaction with rejection.
Mm.
And then you're watching for the other person or people to give it back.
Right, to reinforce it.
Well, that simple statement of you experience what you look for.
Of course.
So you're bringing it. That's your lens. And so, of course, it's what you're looking for then in other people, is your
Mm-hmm.
own rejection.
Right. And if I am seeing my own rejection in others, then that just reinforces that definition even deeper, justifies why I feel this way, and I can blame the outside world for this being my truth as opposed to looking inward.
Because that's exactly right, because you are thinking that when they seem to reject you, or when you see rejection outside of you, you are going, see, that's proof that
Mhm.
I'm right
Mhm.
about me.
Mhm.
But actually, it's not proof you're right about you. It's proof that you are thinking that about you. That's what it's proof of.
Oh, I love that.
So it's not that you need to change in some way. All that needs to change is the way that you're thinking about you. That's all.
Mhm.
Because that's the
So here's where I run into this a lot with
Mhm.
clients that, we'll talk about this core belief or self-definition of not being good enough, or, the long laundry list of those that exist. Um, and the question often comes up, well, how do I change that?
Mhm.
So that may seem simple
Mhm.
or not. I mean, I think for folks who are struggling with trying to change the way they see themselves, um, what would you suggest? Like going through that question, or that like what you put on your blog today. Which I'm wondering. Side note: can we
Mhm.
link your blog
Yes,
to the
I
podcast?
can actually. Yes, and
Great.
I will do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's those simple steps. It's the same all the time.
All the time.
This is not going to get fancier. It's just what it is all the time. It's that you
Hmm.
are experiencing meaning that you yourself are assigning. That's
Hmm.
what's happening. Okay, so in any situation that seems to be proof that you're not good enough, you brought that with you into that situation. You did that. And
Hmm.
so, if you need a shortcut practice, say in the moment, let's say you show up for a job interview and you're in the lobby, if that's a thing right now, or you're on Zoom and you're waiting for the job interview and you notice that you're anxious. Why would you just go, oh, yes, I'm anxious because I'm at a job interview? Of course, that's just normal. Okay, you can do that if you want to, and then you can feel anxious everywhere else you go,
Hmm.
because that's what's going to happen. Because that anxiety is not there because you're at a job interview. The anxiety is there because you're bringing with you your notion that you're not good enough.
Yes.
If you're thinking that you're sitting there waiting for someone to assess you and determine whether they want you or not,
Hmm.
and you feel not good enough, then there's your anxiety.
Hmm.
I often coach clients who have job interviews to flip that whole paradigm on its head and
Yes.
ask, I'm going to this interview to see if this is a place I want to be.
Yes, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Are they good enough for me?
And because this is difficult for people at first, we will make a list of their qualities,
Mhm,
not behaviors, not accomplishments, not anything from their history,
mhm,
but their qualities that anybody would be happy to have around. And so we make that list and we look at how those qualities have shown up in all kind a myriad of ways in their lives,
mhm,
so that they can see that they're true and we're not just making things up.
mhm.
But it's like that. You have to be an active participant in order to recognize what you learned when you were learning language. You have to be motivated. Really, this is what I say to clients. You have to give a shit how you feel. That's really the bottom that's really the bottom line. If you care about how you feel, then you will want to investigate why you feel the way you do and how not
Mhm,
to.
mhm.
It's interesting. Sometimes people will use their own self definitions to invalidate what I'm offering.
Tell
No,
me
so
more about that.
yeah, it's an interesting little trap. So if you're defining yourself as, for example, somebody who has just always felt kind of depressed and anxious,
Mhm,
then you've just accepted that that's who you are.
mhm,
And so if I say something crazy that can result in a super joyful life experience, then they use their own self-definition of being just an anxious, depressed person as a way to exclude themselves from what I'm saying. Like,
mhm,
oh, I see how some people
mm,
do
mhm,
that, but I've just always been this way. If, oh my goodness, if I had like just a single dollar for every time I have heard, I've just always been this way.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why we think that. It is what I've already explained. You don't remember learning language. And so
Right.
you don't remember learning to define yourself. But your behavior and your emotions are telling the whole story all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
It is impossible to feel sad and anxious when you are defining yourself as a once ever expression of life with a once ever life story to live. What
Mm-hmm.
is there to be sad and anxious about if that's the case, if that's what you are?
Mm-hmm.
Because the implications of that, mind blowing. You couldn't explore them all if you lived to be 2,000 years old.
Oh my gosh.
So exciting. So,
So
so
exciting.
try it out is what I'm inviting people to do. Like, listening to my words is not going to change your life. But if you go, I don't know, maybe I am accepting these things as who I am, when in fact they're just something I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
I think we ended the last podcast, well, near the end, I said, I encourage people to do this practice of notice what unpleasant experiences you are just accepting because you learned that they are part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
People are doing it all the time. I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Well, that's just human nature.
Right, right.
But there's no such thing. There's only a definition of human nature. And where did you learn that? You don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And what if there's so many more possibilities to what that could be?
Freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly right. So let's see. Where are we? Abandonment. Shall we talk more specifically about abandonment?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that and how that shows up. There's so much fear of abandonment, and what comes up in the self definition if you feel abandoned.
hmm Well, that the person or people who are abandoning you have just become proof of your negative self-definition. When somebody leaves you, to you, the person who's being left, it looks like a validation of the worst things that you say about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and since I had relationship craziness was my real thing that I tortured myself with for years. I was all about avoiding abandonment. That was my game of trying to figure out how to not be left.
Mm-hmm.
Betrayed and abandoned was my theme song, like every time somebody left me or lied to me or cheated on me or just disappointed me in some way, I felt this crushing. Yeah, no, it was not funny at the time for sure, but
Sure.
because I felt just this crushing certainty that there was something so wrong with me that I could not be loved by people. That was the meaning that I assigned to every look of disapproval, to every guy in the vicinity that didn't seem enamored of me. I mean, even if he was just indifferent, I interpreted that as, if there wasn't something wrong with me, he would be interested. Never mind that he was married and had 4 kids on the playground where I was sitting. That didn't it didn't mitigate, that's a good word, it didn't mitigate my self-definition at all,
Mm-hmm.
because I was the one telling the story, not him, whoever the him was. And it wasn't just about romantic relationships either. It was about friendships, it was about family, it was about employers and colleagues, it was just everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So something that we see all the time in all the people, in fact, probably most of this nation's industry is based on it, which is we need to present ourselves in a way that other people will find pleasant, that they will
Mm-hmm.
approve of. And that's both internally and externally. We need them to say yes to us basically, you know, yes to the way I look, yes to the way I talk, yes to the way I think, yes to the way I feel, yes to what I do, yes to all my opinions. I mean, just look at social media. Isn't it set up exactly for that? All, and I mean
Exactly.
all of it. I'm referring to
Mm-hmm.
all the ones, all the platforms. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
come on, show me that I'm worthy by agreeing with me.
Mm-hmm.
And what madness happens when people are not agreeable
Mm-hmm.
on any of the platforms? It's chaos erupts, and people just have such venomous responses. And remember what we said earlier, that, you know, all assholery comes from fear. Think about that the next time you see a Twitter war, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a definition of not as good as, or not good enough for, that manifests as a fear of betrayal and abandonment. And then I get to be real busy trying to avoid feeling abandoned and betrayed. And man, that can manifest as all kinds of crazy things. Like, I'll just use myself as an example. I just did way too much for everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I presented that as, oh, look how I love to do things for people. And then I would get worn out and I would be instantly bitchy and resentful about the whole thing because I was tired and I felt unappreciated. Nobody seemed grateful enough for all the stuff that I was doing that no one had asked me to do in the
And
first place.
in the clinical world, we call that codependence, right?
That is exactly right. Yeah. And so codependence, if you've gotten that terminology presented to you in the past, as I have many times, that's really all that it means.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you are entering every relationship from a place of unworthiness. And so before the situation even begins, you fear being abandoned and betrayed.
Mm.
You fear rejection. And so you way overcompensate. And when that doesn't work, you burn it down.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
I'm sure that sounds familiar too.
So
Everybody
familiar to
probably.
a lot of people. I hear that a lot. And you know, I'm thinking, Kathy, like I keep having this thought in my head of, I have clients who talk about feeling alone in a group of people,
Mm-hmm.
or feeling, you know, maybe in a partnership and feeling very lonely, or loneliness
Mm-hmm.
being a very strong component of their self-definition.
I love that you bring that up because that was for sure a problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've had it whether I was in a relationship, whether I was in a crowded room, whether I was alone, which I hated. I had it all the time. And so loneliness is a feeling, right? And remember, in the steps that I outlined earlier,
Mm-hmm.
identifying and admitting to the feeling is the first thing to do. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel lonely. And then, okay, how am I defining myself right now that is resulting in this loneliness? You know, something's missing. I'm missing something. There's something I need that can only come from others, and it's not coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that this is actually bringing us all the way back around to your earlier discussion of attachment, because you talked a little bit about how folks with unmet needs,
Mm-hmm.
how that manifests in their ways of attaching or not attaching.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an interesting thing about emotional needs. We all learned the same definition, that we need other people in our lives to be a fulfilled emotional being. And I'm just going to say it, it is not true. Not only is it not true, but it's not possible for other people to change that loneliness for us. Because we are the ones defining ourselves as the one with something missing. So
Mm-hmm.
nobody can, in the recovery world, as they say, no one and nothing can fill that hole for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're digging it with your self-definition in every situation. You're the one coming to the situation with the hole, and you are the only one that can stop doing that. So it's not a matter of filling the hole, it's you recognizing that you're defining yourself in a way that's digging the hole, and stop. So I know that for people who haven't been talking or thinking about this maybe for a long time, I know that that can feel like, are you saying that I'm just going to be like solitary, like I'm not going to want any people around? No, I'm saying you're actually going to start enjoying people because you don't need anything from them.
Mm-hmm.
And they are going to enjoy you because they're not feeling that invisible pressure that you have of wanting them to approve of you and like you and see you and understand you and tell you that you're worthy or behave in a way that says you're worthy. That all of that is your job. And
Mm-hmm.
when you free the people around you from doing your job, they cannot wait to be with you because there's just such ease. They don't have a job. It's just enjoyment for both of you. So if there are unmet needs, my loves, that is your job. It's not your partner's job. It's not your family's job. It's not your employer's job or your colleagues or your children. It's your job. One more time, I'm going to say that you are creating that feeling of loneliness is what happens when you define yourself as having something missing.
I love that.
So you can see how you can be in a crowded room and you have walked into that room with the definition that I am not going to be able to be what I need to be or do what I need to do or interact with people the way I want to. They're going to think I'm weird. They're going to think I don't belong here. What if I say something stupid? All of those thoughts come out of that original self-definition that you are not good enough for fill in the blank, whatever it is. And so as you're standing there defining yourself as that, it creates an enormous distance between you and other people.
Absolutely. There you are alone in a crowded room. Yeah. Or in a relationship,
Absolutely.
looking to your partner to fill these needs that they can't possibly fill. And then you see that as disappointment, rejection,
Absolutely.
abandonment.
Because you brought all of that with you into that relationship,
Right.
and the other person brought their own self-definition into the
Mm-hmm.
relationship, which psychologically is known sometimes as trauma bonding.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, that's what's happening, is that we each bring in a definition of needing something from the other for whatever reason, and that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
My clients take that as a bit of hard news at first when I say that their definition of a romantic relationship needs to just be scrapped and let's just start over. Because we've learned so much ridiculousness about what that needs to be or what it should be, what the other person, this is the really funny thing about it. Every single individual learned that they rightfully have expectations of the other person in that romantic relationship. Well, who's the other person? If all of us are expecting that, where's that mystery other person with all the good stuff? If we're all the ones wanting, where's the one with the stuff?
No wonder we're all so fucked up, right?
Yes. And then we're like just running into each other. You know, it's that hilarious thing that I used to say about, it's like we're all fish swimming around in the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And every fish we meet, we say, will you be my ocean? And then we're pissed when they say no, but when they say yes, we don't believe them because we've been let down by fish before. We know they're not really going to be our ocean. So we come into that relationship on edge because of
Right.
what we were taught that a romantic relationship is for.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's like we're coming in with the expectations we already know are going to be let down. Like,
Yes.
wow, what a cycle.
What a setup we do
What
to
a setup.
ourselves and to the other
Yeah.
person.
Right.
And oh my God, I used to think, oh, this is another expression that really throws us all way off base, which is, my picker's broke.
Yeah.
When clients say that to me, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with your picker. There's just all the same people to pick from. We've all been taught the same thing. So you're going to get one of us. We all think the same thing. So it's not about your picker being broke. It's about your self-definition being broke.
Mm,
That's all. It's just some words.
right.
Yeah. So I know that it's almost time for us to wrap up. I want to say one more thing about the romantic relationship, because lots of people have real big reactions to the dismantling of the old definition, but it's so much more fun to try on a new one. For example, what if a romantic relationship is meant to be two people fulfilling their own new self-definitions for themselves and then coming together to enjoy all of the aspects that each one of them brings, each of them being a once ever expression of life? What
Mm,
if a romantic relationship was to support and enjoy for each of them for themselves, the expression of that once ever being into reality?
mm,
Holy shit, right?
right.
You know, lots of people who are listening probably know who Byron Katie is. And she had some extraordinary wedding vows with her husband, Stephen Mitchell, who's also a famous writer. And she said, I won't get this exactly right. It's been a very long time since I heard her talk about this, but their wedding vows said something like, I will love you until I don't. That was it. And so far, they've been married a really long time.
Oh,
And her point in that, of
uh-huh.
course, was we're not going to say anything based on that silly definition of romantic partners fulfilling each other,
Hmm.
because as we have just seen, it's complete bullshit and sets everybody involved up for disappointment, rejection, abandonment.
Mm, there
So
it is.
what if you could have that romantic relationship that's just another celebration of yourself as a once ever expression of life with an incalculable value? Because you cannot determine the value of a thing if it's the only one of its kind. And that's you.
I love that. And thinking about the relationship with the romantic relationship with the self,
Yeah.
how lovely that would be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. How lovely that would be if you just gave yourself all the things that you learned to want from someone else.
Mm,
Because it is your job. Cut out the middleman. Get to it.
yeah, love that.
Yeah. Yes.
This has
So
been so fun.
it is so fun. As usual, there's so much more to say, and we're just trusting that these podcast topics are going to evolve as they need to do, because that is the way of things. So invite any of you who listen to this to please leave your questions in the comments, or you can email either Lisa or myself. I always put our email addresses just under the video. So yeah, we would love to hear from you.
And you're going to link your fabulous blog post in to this podcast as well.
I am going to do that. Yes. Yes, I
Great.
will. Yes. So what's our thing that we say at the end?
All joy all the time, because why settle for any less?
Yay. Excellent.
I love that.